Okay. Yeah. I think you guys met yeah. Andrea described her as a little diva today, and I didn't know what that meant. I think in the. This is clear, right? No, that's what I thought too, but.
Can you sit in front of the house so we have to sit?
Yeah.
Got a lot of
She has a good turnout.
If I don't know my own book.
Yeah. Oh my god. I just thought about like that was really maybe I
Okay. I mean, the room's not that big.
They are recording, and it's also an accessibility.
Work close.
It is like, I hear you.
Okay, so hi, I'm Lou Brown of the Forum for Scholars and Publics of the Franklin Humanities Institute at Duke University. Sorry about that. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you to the great team here at Flyleaf, Emma, the team, for hosting this event. Also, a quick thank you to our university sponsors, the Franklin Humanities Institute and the Office of the Dean of Humanities and the Arts at Duke, and at UNC, the Department of English and Comparative Literature, the Writing Program, and the Department of American Studies. I had a chance to hear Carlo speak earlier today at Duke. We did have a little lunch over there. And I will tell you that a few of our jaded faculty members left saying, I'm going to go buy that book. So, you know, this is going to be a good talk. I think I can confidently say that. At our featured guest's request, I'm keeping the introduction short. So I'll preface this by saying they've both accomplished a lot as scholars, teachers, and humans. So what you're about to hear are heavily condensed professional biographies. Carlo Rotella's most recent book is What Can I Get Out of This?, the one that many of you are holding, Teaching and Learning in a Classroom Full of Skeptics. A professor of English, American Studies, and Journalism at Boston College, he has written books about cities, music, boxing, and literature, among other subjects. He writes regularly for the New York Times Magazine, and his work has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, and the Best American Essays. Speaking with him tonight is Florence Dore, who's a professor of English at UNC Chapel Hill and a scholar of American literature. She's the author of 3 scholarly books and is currently writing a 4th entitled Close Reading and Civil Discourse, Why Democracy Needs Literary Study. Dore has created and led numerous public square projects, and she's an independent musician as well, and has put out 2 albums, with a 3rd on the way in 2026. That is not easy work, so congratulations. We're in for a real treat to hear these 2 tonight. We'll start with Carlo reading a selection from the book, then he and Florence will talk with each other. There'll be time for questions with you, and there'll also be a chance for some more book signing at the end. So thanks very much and welcome to you both.
It doesn't want to do that.
funny, I'm so sorry.
Is that too far away? Is that going to be all right?
It's good, and I can always turn it up for you all.
Thank you, Lou, and thanks, Florence, for bringing me here, and my team of sponsors. Apparently, there's a lot of them. And thanks to Flyleaf, too, and to all of you for coming, especially those of you who are doing it for the extra credit. I really appreciate it. We good on sound?
Well, I don't want there to be feedback. I know a little thing or two about this.
Yeah, I think just talk a little bit. Check.
Check. 1, 2.
Can you guys hear him okay? Just project, Carly.
Yeah, I just rather just talk.
That's fine.
So I'm going to talk for a bit and then I'm going to read for a bit. I wrote a book about what happens in the classroom. So it's not only a book about what happens between student and teacher and between student and student, but also about what happens inside everyone's minds. The classroom in question is Stokes Hall South 209 on the campus of Boston College. And the class is my section of a course known at BC as Lit Core, a required literature course that almost every freshman has to take. In most cases, their first and last college level literature course. The semester in question is spring of 2020, which started out as just another semester, but was transformed by the COVID pandemic in ways that obliged us to think hard about the value of school in general and face-to-face learning and teaching in the classroom in particular. So that's what the book is about. What happens in the classroom, what it means, what it might be worth. So in a bit, I'm going to read a passage and then we can talk about it. But first, I want to frame the book for you a little. And one way to do that is to offer some answers to a basic question, which is, why did you write a book about what happens in the classroom? So, answer number one. The classroom, and the college classroom in particular, is a black box in our culture. There is no lack of strong opinions about what happens or doesn't happen there, but most of us tend to avoid the details. Consider what happens as an extreme but actually pretty typical example when Hollywood encounters the college classroom. Usually after no more than a few seconds, there's a fight, a chase, a nightmarish display of professorial oversharing, or some other spectacular interruption of business as usual, as if sitting there and watching teaching and learning take place is an unendurable horror. Take the movie Arrival, right? It's known as a thoughtful movie about smart people. The main character is a professor. But when the movie tries to show a college class, it panics after only a few seconds and has space aliens invade. So the students and their professor end up watching the alien invasion on TV in class instead of having class. So the lesson here is clear. Watching people watch screens with their mouths hanging open is fine, even thrilling. But watching people teach and learn is to be avoided at all costs. Our popular culture, like our political culture, Congress is not that different from Hollywood on this score, shuns the classroom like a hydrophobic raccoon avoids suburban swimming pools. And yet many people who don't spend any time in classrooms are very sure that they know what's going on in there and that terrible things are happening. From lowered standards and participation trophies for everyone, to ideological indoctrination, to failure to provide return on investment or equip young people for careers. So I thought it would be useful to open the black box and show some humans actually doing the humanities. I have at least 3 more answers to why did you write this book. Answer number 2, the face-to-face classroom is getting more, not less, cutting edge. Every supposedly game-changing tech advance that affects education tends to make face-to-face teaching and learning rarer and more valuable. Zoom was the big new thing in spring 2020, and massive open online courses were the big new ed tech thing before Zoom. Those old enough will remember when MOOCs were going to disrupt and revolutionize education. And since Zoom, AI has now thrown educators into a fresh round of revising their habits, with many deciding to concentrate less on papers and more on what happens in class, backed up by old-fashioned blue book exams and oral exams. So, like Zoom and MOOCs before it, AI has made us freshly aware of the unique value of the face-to-face classroom and inspired at least some teachers to make the humanities more human and humane in response. That includes finally getting around to banning screens in their classrooms, which all by itself makes an enormous difference. All the booster talk about wondrous educational applications of emergent technology raises queasy-making echoes for me of Woodrow Wilson exclaiming, "They teach history with lightning," in response to seeing the birth of a nation. And the fact is that during the pandemic, parents were rightly not okay with the prospect of paying full freight for super high-tech online gadget college. It's not the same thing as the face-to-face kind. Answer number 3. What happens in the literature classroom is important. That's where students develop and practice a fundamental competence that they will need no matter what they end up doing for a living. Extracting meaning from the world and making arguments in support of that interpretation. The skills involved include some that are in worrisomely short supply in our culture these days, in ways that endanger the functioning of democracy. Assessing the relative reliability of what you read and see and hear, for instance, or developing empathy for others. In putting these tools in our toolboxes, we're pursuing both of the basic missions of the humanities. There are 2 main positions in a long-running internal debate among humanists about the value of the humanities. One side sees the principal value of the humanities in teaching lessons about how to live. The topic of my section of Lit Core was the misfit. All the books were about social misfits, so there were lessons aplenty on how and how not to live. The other side, in the long-running debate, sees the principal value of the humanities in the acquisition of equipment for living in the form of analytical skills, often described as critical thinking. Though it's been going on for centuries, it's actually not a very compelling debate, since there's an obvious both and, not either or, and a solution to the problem it purports to address, just like the contrived standoff between taste great and less filling in those old Miller Lite ads. If you're looking for lessons in how to live, you have to work on your analytical chops so that you can get meaning out of all kinds of artifacts in which those lessons might be found. If you're looking for lessons in analytical chopsmanship, then you need some kind of application to the problem of how to live to impart the necessary urgency of a meaningful answer to the so what question. So taste great and less filling. How we extract meaning from and impose meaning on the world around us is a subject you should encounter at some point in your time on campus, whether you want to or not. Making it difficult to duck this encounter is part of the value of LitCore and of the distribution requirements of a core curriculum that obliges students to at least dip a toe in many disciplines. Though it has long been true that there's not much difference in lifetime earnings among the different majors, a well-kept secret. Students, egged on by their parents, would often rather be using college to prepare intensively for a particular career, like training full-time in a sport as preparation for playing that sport professionally. They will graduate into a working world where the games and the rules keep changing at ever more dizzying speeds. A more accurate athletic analogy for the entry-level labor market, instead of majoring in baseball in school and then playing baseball for a living, would be they want you to play dodgeball with bales of data one day and ballroom dance with clients the next. So students need to train to be all-around athletes, ready for everything and anything. The sudden but uneven intrusion of AI into nearly every industry has made the weakness of the crude vocational approach to college even more abundantly clear. As finance and computer science majors are just now finding out, the rise of AI has made it much harder to time the entry-level labor market 4 or 3 or even 2 years out from picking a major, which is just another reason to ignore anybody telling you that you have to pick a major that has the same name as the job you want to get. The opposite strategy would be to pick a major that allows you to go deep on what interests you, while also getting yourself a nice, well-rounded liberal arts education, heavy on meta skills like adaptability, being good at learning fast, and being hard to fool. And let's not forget, even though approximately 100% of commentators on higher ed do forget, that the liberal arts include math and science and music. I wanted to write about literature, finally, answer number 4. I wanted to write about literature and about school in ways that do justice to the experience of people. Most writing about these subjects feels too abstract to me. The people's encounter with school and with literature is the opposite of that. It's immediate, full of feeling, often sweaty and uncomfortable. So I wanted to write a book about school and about the study of literature that was full of how humans feel. Those are some of my reasons for writing the book. Here's just a quick word on how I wrote it. To properly tell the story of one class over one eventful semester and explore its bigger picture implications, I had to get into students' heads. To that end, I employed a technique that, as far as I can tell, has rarely been used by people who have strong opinions about college, especially people who write the kind of Jeremiads that achieve notoriety by complaining that students these days can't write, won't read, and are closed-minded sheep. I asked students what they were thinking. More people who have public things to say about higher education should try it. It turns out that there's a lot going on in students' heads, some of it even related to class. Okay, some basic details. There were 32 freshmen and 1 sophomore in the class, 17 women and 16 men. And there was also a teaching assistant, a super capable MA student named Allie in the book. I changed all the students' names in the book. They actually all gave me permission to use their real names, but they were way too forthcoming about their personal lives and their families, and so I thought it was better to just protect everybody and change the names. Most of the students were heading for business or STEM majors and did not regard English as a strength or a main interest. And many of them started out somewhat too very skeptical about the whole enterprise of interpreting literature. A significant proportion, including some who had gotten good grades in English in high school, but had still looked with suspicion on classmates who talked a lot in those classes, tended to regard the interpretation of literature as sorcery or bullshit. So part of my job as a teacher of a required freshman literature class was to show them that this kind of analysis is a craft. You can learn and master, like building a cabinet or planting a garden. That was part of moving them from their initial reaction to lit core, which was often, can I get out of this, to adding one more word to the question. What can I get out of this? Starting about 15 months after the class ended, I interviewed almost all the students in their junior and senior years. Everybody had an hour-long interview to start with. I invited several students back for more interviews. I got to know some of them better because they took other courses with me, and I started correspondences with some of them, which continue to this day. They're all out of college now, and employed, weirdly. The chapters shift back and forth between diving deep into individual students' minds and telling the story of the semester, which starts out like any other until the pandemic comes along to remind us that face-to-face learning and teaching is a precious thing that can be taken away from us. There are chapters devoted to topics like unreliable narrators, the prevalence on campus of anxiety, loneliness, and feeling like a misfit, the importance and difficulty of speaking up in class, learning to college in the way that people in prison talk about learning to jail, how to get into a book you hate, and in fact, how to use your violent reaction against a book as a way into it. I'm talking to this area over here. How to strike the crucial educational balance between getting with the program and taking just what you want or need, and the vital importance of anteing up and becoming a participating citizen in the community of inquiry that forms in the classroom, which is among the most vital meta skills to learn in a discussion-based class. So I'm going to give you a taste of the book. I'm going to read from a chapter entitled Speaking Up, which is about speaking up in class. Now we can talk about it. So what I did is I went through this chapter and sort of chopped it up, but I think it still flows together. And really the only thing you need to know is that my policy is that we hear from everyone in the class at every class meeting. That's the ideal. Certainly we hear from you regularly and ideally at every class meeting. Which students told me made them, they told me it made them anxious, but it also made them do the reading. So I'm willing to make that trade. Speaking up. Colleen and Kathy weren't speaking up in class. They had each taken their turn to introduce themselves during the first day ice-breaking ritual, but that jumpstart had not led to their consistently volunteering to speak in subsequent class meetings. Neither Colleen, who usually sat halfway back and to my right, nor Kathy, who usually sat near the back and to my left, displayed the seethingly slack affect of somebody who believes she's in the wrong place and is counting the seconds until she can get the hell out of there. Rather, they usually looked engaged, paying attention, taking notes, and at times I thought to detect on each of their faces the alert and slightly pained look of someone who has things to say and isn't saying them. When I first started teaching, my attitude towards students who remained silent in discussion classes could be summed up with the words of Bernard Hopkins, the fistic sage of Philadelphia. Bernard Hopkins going to do what Bernard Hopkins going to do. If students didn't want to talk, it was on them. They were free to choose not to speak and would have to accept the lower grade that came as a consequence. After all, I had not talked much in class when I was a student, and I had resisted professors who tried to make me talk. But though I still regard the Hopkins credo as words to live by, I've learned the error of my ways when it comes to applying it to silent students. Silence is usually not their preferred state, and indeed was not my preferred state when I was one of them. I had things to say, and it bothered me that I often couldn't make myself say them. Trying to help silent students find a way into the conversation and thus into full citizenship in the classroom turns out to be no big effort for a teacher, and the results can be life-changing for the student. It also benefits the teacher because the quietly contagious excitement of previously stymied students who finally found a way to speak up improves classroom chemistry, and nothing makes teaching, learning easier or more joyful than good classroom chemistry. A classroom in which everyone there has anteed up as a participant is a much better, more effective, more dynamic, more transformative classroom than one in which some people are holding back from being full participants in our communal inquiry. Typically, silent students are just a little more worried than others about saying something wrong, or irrelevant, or incoherent, or just plain stupid, that will produce the long, awkward silence they fear most of all. Or maybe they find it a little harder than others to time the flow of give and take so that they can jump in at the right moment with a relevant comment. Or they might be hit a little harder than others by the alienating effects of imposter syndrome, homesickness, or skepticism about literary interpretation, any of which might make others' apparent ease of entry into our discussions seem especially forbidding. Whatever the reasons, for silent students, silence, it's a problem that I can and should address with them, in keeping with the bedrock principle that you must go and get an education rather than wait passively for someone to hand it to you. I should have gotten to Kathy and Colleen much sooner in the semester than I did, but it was a big class, and it took me too long to notice that they were straggling. Still, before we got any deeper into the semester, I asked Kathy and then Colleen to come to my office during office hours to meet with me one-on-one. There is an expectation that we hear from you in class, I wrote in an email to each of them, intentionally avoiding the first person to avoid making it seem as if I was personally expecting them to talk. I wanted rather to strike a dispassionate and procedural note, more like this is how this class is properly done. Form expresses meaning, even in an email. I wrote, if you are having trouble finding your way into the conversation, let's figure out a strategy that works for you. Finding out more about them, both in these meetings and in subsequent conversations with each of them that continued well past the end of the semester, dispelled the illusion of sameness generated by the opacity of silence. Silent students may have their silence in common, but the distinctive quality of each one's silence conceals depths of individuality. They may not be talking, and they may not always be thinking about what I want them to think about, but they are thinking, which means that if I consider myself any kind of pro at all, I should try to figure out a way to reach them. I started with Kathy. As she told me later when I interviewed her, she's from Greenwich, Connecticut, and attended a small private academy abundantly endowed with capital, posh tiger moms, and expectations of moving on to a suitably exclusive college. There were no boys in her classes until the 9th grade, and she didn't adjust well to the change. She had spoken up in middle school where classes had been small and she had felt comfortable among girls she knew well. This is a quote. But as the years went on and we started being mixed with our brother's school, I kind of didn't know how to act around boys. She clammed up, and it didn't help that she didn't get along with her English teacher. She just didn't like me for some reason, she said. Maybe it's because I was a bit of a jokester, but nothing, malicious, and I also have ADD, and maybe that might have distracted the class at times. She kind of set a bad tone for my English experience, especially because I had it twice. As a freshman in college, she said, I was this anxious little ball, not wanting to, scared of doing one wrong thing, antsy, just finding my place in college. She actually had a strong crew in Lit Corps, her best pal Charlotte, and also Liz and Bill, 2 more members of her recently formed friend group. And they all encouraged her. I was so tortured. I'd be like, you can say something to Charlotte. And she's like, no, you say it. I'm not saying that. We were all like, all right, you're going to say something this class. Her friends found ways to speak up, and Bill in particular became a regular contributor, but she sat there rehearsing things she could say and then not saying them. She had formed the erroneous impression that there were several upperclassmen in the room. There was just one, a sophomore, which she allowed to intimidate her. This is a quote too. And there were a lot of boys, specifically hockey boys. There were, I agreed, an unusual number of male students in that class who, like her friend Bill, felt comfortable talking about literature. And it couldn't have helped that one of what she called the hockey boys took the lead as a participatory icebreaker at the beginning of the semester. Wilson, yes, I know, said Kathy, looking back at her terrified freshman self, as if to say, you see what I was dealing with? I get to college, and there are serious business hockey boys who are going on to the Olympics and the NHL, and on top of that, they turn out to be suave literary sophisticates, too. When Kathy came to see me at office hours, I proposed a plan that would lower the bar to participation for her. At the next class meeting, we decided she would know the opening question in advance, which would allow her to prepare an answer. She would put up her hand, and I would call on her right away. Going first would prevent her from building up a disabling head of anticipation and dread as the class meeting went on. It would also eliminate any need to worry about being preempted by someone else or timing and adjusting her comment to fit into the flow of discussion. On the evening before our next class meeting, I sent an email to all the students reminding them to come to class prepared with a passage from chapter 2 of Junot Diaz's The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, the book we were reading at the time, and at least the beginning of a thought about why that passage matters. When we got down to business in class the next day, Kathy put up her hand, I called on her, and she said something on point about a passage she'd chosen. Neither she nor I recalls what it was, but let's say it was about how Lola's mother, Bailey, is pushing just as hard for her actively rebellious daughter to be a regular girl as everybody seems to be pushing Bailey's passively dissenting son, Oscar, to be a regular guy. When a student who doesn't normally talk says something, I want, without making an embarrassing fuss, to make extra sure to reinforce the contribution by noting its usefulness. So I said something like, okay, that gets us off to a good start. Kathy is pointing out how in this novel, the business of enforcing norms is not just about dictators and men. Now we also have a mom and daughter pair, which looks like a more complicated pattern starting to form. We'll start by making a pile of these observations, then we can step back and look at our pile and see what larger patterns we can make out. Who'd like to go next and add to the pile? So Kathy had spoken in class and lived to tell about it. She had not babbled meaningless nonsense that caused a dark abyss of embarrassed silence to yawn open after she spoke. She had not been struck down by apoplexy or lightning or subjected to gales of mocking laughter from distorted faces out of a nightmare. She looked like she felt pretty good about it. In fact, she felt so good that 20 minutes later, she put her hand up again. I try to call on students in reverse order of how often they raise their hands, so when a student who rarely talks puts up her hand, I go right to her. Kathy made a second point, this one building on something someone else had just said. Even if she had prepared this second point in advance, she'd still had to find an opportune moment to slide it into the conversation. Another big step for her. Restraining an urge to dart across the room to high-five her, I again underscored that she'd contributed to our collective effort. Something on the order of, so Kathy's pointing us to the importance of X, which we can put together with what Dalha was saying about Y, and David said about Z, and that's starting to look like a clear set of connections between form and theme that helps us see how temporarily shifting the narrator to Lola does meaningful work. Part of my job is to show students they're participating as full citizens in an ongoing project, our crafting of interpretive arguments about the meanings that flow through a text. And one way I can do that is to recognize and reinforce such participation when it happens. See this thing Kathy has done. She has brought us thick pelts and